What would you do if a company took back money you had already earned? Not money you hoped to earn. Money that had already been approved, documented, scheduled for payout. Then someone in a suit looked you in the eye and calmly said, "Leadership made a business decision." That's exactly what happened to me. My name is Molly Davis, and 3 days after my bonus was cut during my performance review, a $59 million merger collapsed because my signature wasn't there. Before we continue, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel, but only if this story resonates with you. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now, let me tell you exactly how this happened. That Thursday morning, I arrived at the office just after 7. The parking garage was still half empty, the way it usually is when you work with engineers and product teams who prefer starting early. I badged into the building and rode the elevator to the 12th floor of Northbridge Analytics, a mid-size enterprise software company with about 1,600 employees. I'd worked there for nearly 9 years. My role was Director of Product Operations, which, translated into plain English, meant I was the person who made sure the company's biggest clients didn't lose their minds when our systems changed. I coordinated engineering deployments, managed integration timelines, handled transition planning for enterprise accounts. By 2024, I was overseeing deployments for over 60 major clients, including several accounts worth more than $10 million in annual contracts. If something went wrong in production, my team fixed it, quietly, efficiently, and most executives barely noticed. That morning, when I opened my laptop, the first thing I saw was a calendar invite. Subject line, Q2 Performance Review, Compensation Discussion, scheduled for 10 o'clock. Attendees me, my manager Ronan Pike, and someone I had never met before, Wade Kinnan, Vice President of Finance. I stared at the screen for a moment, because when finance shows up in your performance review, something is about to change. What just happened was just the beginning. I want to point out that some details in this story have been fictionalized and aided by AI to clarify the message and enhance the emotional experience. If you empathize with the story, I truly appreciate it. And if not, I still wish you a peaceful evening and a good night's sleep. The meeting started a few minutes after 10 o'clock. I walked into a small interior conference room on the 12th floor. No windows, just a long table, gray walls, and the faint humming sound of the building's ventilation system. Ronan Pike was already there. He gave me a tight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Across the table sat Wade Kinnan, the new Vice President of Finance. Navy suit, perfect posture, the kind of expression that looked like it had never changed in his entire life. He didn't stand when I walked in. Didn't smile either. I sat down and placed my notebook on the table. "Thanks for coming, Molly," Ronan said. "Of course," I replied. "What's this about?" Wade folded his hands calmly. "We're reviewing compensation structures for the quarter." I nodded slowly. "That makes sense. Q2 numbers just closed, and my numbers were strong. My team had completed 3 enterprise deployments without a single critical incident. Client retention across my accounts was above 93%. 2 of our largest customers had renewed multi-year contracts worth nearly $11 million combined. Every metric in the review system had been approved the previous week. Ronan cleared his throat. "Molly, your performance this quarter has been excellent." The word "but" was already hanging in the air before he said it. "But the company is going through a strategic adjustment phase." Wade slid a printed sheet across the table. "We've decided to revise certain bonus allocations." I glanced down. The document showed my name. My approved Q2 bonus had been $48,000. The revised number was $15,000, a reduction of $33,000. I looked up slowly. "I'm sorry," I said. "Did I miss something in the performance report?" Wade shook his head calmly. "No, this is simply a business decision, for a moment." Nobody said anything. The paper was still sitting in front of me on the table. $48,000 approved performance. Bonus revised amount $15,000. $33,000. Just gone. I looked at Ronan Pike first. "Was my performance rating changed?" I asked. Ronan shifted in his chair. No. Your review remains excellent. Did any of my targets fail? No. So nothing in the performance report changed. Ronan hesitated. That's correct. I turned to Wade Kinnan. Then explain something to me, I said calmly. How does a completed quarter suddenly lose $33,000? Wade didn't blink. This adjustment was made at the executive level. Based on what budget realignment? I almost laughed. Budget realignment. 3 words executives use when they don't want to explain anything. I leaned back in my chair. Just to be clear, I said, the bonus was already approved in the system last week. Yes, Wade said. And the work tied to it was completed 2 months ago. Yes. So this isn't a performance decision, it's a leadership decision, Wade replied evenly. Ronan cleared his throat. Molly, the company is entering a strategic transition period. There it was. The phrase everyone had been whispering about for weeks. Transition, corporate code for merger negotiations. I nodded slowly. Let me guess. I said, this adjustment is temporary. Neither of them answered. Wade slid another document toward me. We'll need you to sign the revised compensation agreement. I glanced at it. The form basically said I accepted the reduced bonus. If I signed it, the company could claim I agreed to the change. If I refused, well, that part wasn't written down. I folded the paper once and set it back on the table. I'll review this, I said. Wade gave a thin smile. You have until end of business tomorrow. I nodded. Then I stood up and walked out of the conference room, because there was something both of them clearly hadn't read. A clause buried in my employment contract. A clause that only activates when compensation changes before a merger. And if I was right, Northbridge Analytics had just made a very expensive mistake. I left the office earlier than usual that day, not because I was angry, because I needed to think. The drive home felt strangely quiet. My mind kept replaying the meeting in that windowless conference room, Wade Kinnan's calm voice, Ronan Pike avoiding eye contact, the paper sliding across the table like the decision had already been finalized before I even walked in. $33,000. Just erased. When I got home, I didn't even take off my jacket. I walked straight into my study, opened the filing cabinet, and pulled out the thick folder that held my employment documents. Most people never read their contracts again after signing them. I had, years ago, back when I first joined Northbridge Analytics. The company had convinced me to leave a stable job at another firm, to secure the transition. They offered something called a retention agreement. At the time, it didn't seem like a big deal. Just a clause designed to keep key employees from leaving if the company was ever sold or merged. I sat down at the desk and flipped through the pages. Salary terms, benefits, stock participation. Then the retention agreement appeared, about halfway through the packet. 3 pages, signed 7 years earlier. I read slowly, scanning every line until I found the section I remembered. Change of control protection. The clause explained that if the company entered merger negotiations and attempted to reduce my compensation within the 12 months preceding the transaction, the retention agreement would activate immediately. I read the sentence again, then again, because that clause did something very specific. If triggered, the company would owe me 18 months of salary plus a revenue protection bonus tied to my client accounts. I pulled out my calculator. My base salary was $130,000. 18 months of that was nearly $200,000, with the revenue percentage added. The number climbed even higher. I leaned back slowly in my chair, because Wade Kinnan thought he had just saved the company $33,000. What he had actually done was trigger a payout worth well over $200,000, and the executives negotiating that $59 million merger had no idea it had just been activated. The next morning, I went back to the office like nothing had happened. That was intentional. When something big is about to unfold inside a company, the worst thing you can do is make noise too early, so I followed my normal routine. Coffee, inbox. Deployment status reports from my team. No one in the office knew that a single clause in my contract had just turned into a potential $200,000 liability for the company. Around 9:30, I opened my email and drafted a short message to human resources. Not emotional, not confrontational, just precise. I typed, "Hello. I'd like to confirm something regarding yesterday's performance review. My Q2 performance bonus was previously approved at $48,000. During the meeting, I was informed the amount has been reduced to $15,000. Can you please confirm that this change represents an official reduction of previously approved compensation?" Then I hit send. That email was important, because if they confirmed it in writing, the trigger clause in my contract would be undeniable. About 40 minutes later, a reply appeared from HR, short, professional, and very clear. Yes, the adjustment reflects a revised compensation decision approved by executive leadership. I read the line twice. Then I forwarded the email to my personal account and saved a copy. Evidence, once that message existed. The situation changed. What Wade Kinnan had framed as a routine budget adjustment was now documented as a retroactive reduction in compensation, exactly the scenario described in my retention agreement, for the rest of the day. I worked normally. Meetings, client calls, system checks. But something else was happening quietly behind the scenes, because by late afternoon, I received a call from someone I had never spoken to before, a corporate attorney representing Northbridge Analytics, and the moment she introduced herself, I realized the company had finally started reading my contract. "If you think I did the right thing by calmly documenting the bonus cut and asking HR to confirm it in writing, leave a 1 in the comments because your voice matters." And these conversations remind people that fairness at work still deserves to be defended. The call came a little after 4 o'clock that afternoon. I was reviewing a deployment timeline when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I answered anyway. "Hello, Molly Davis speaking." A calm, professional voice responded. "Ms. Davis, my name is Eleanor Shaw. I'm outside counsel representing Northbridge Analytics." I leaned back slowly in my chair. Corporate lawyers rarely call employees unless something has already gone wrong. "I see," I said. "How can I help you?" There was a brief pause. "I'm calling regarding a retention agreement attached to your employment contract." So they had found it. "Go on," I said. "The company recently became aware that certain interpretations of that agreement may differ from current executive expectations." That sentence was carefully constructed. Lawyers are very good at saying nothing in long, complicated ways. "You mean the clause triggered by a reduction in compensation?" I said calmly. Another pause. "Yes, that clause." I could almost hear her choosing her next words. "The company believes the recent adjustment to your performance bonus may fall within executive discretion and therefore may not constitute a triggering event." "Interesting," I replied, because the HR department just confirmed in writing that it was a compensation reduction. Silence. A longer silence this time. When Eleanor spoke again, her voice had changed slightly, more cautious. "Ms. Davis, the company is currently evaluating several strategic options, and we'd prefer to clarify this matter before any misunderstandings escalate." Strategic options. Another phrase that really meant only one thing: merger negotiations. "I'm happy to clarify," I said, "but I think it would be best if I reviewed the agreement with my own attorney first." That answer landed exactly the way I expected it to. Another pause. "That is, of course, you're right," she said carefully. Then she added something that confirmed my suspicion. "However, I would encourage you to consider the broader implications of how this proceeds." I smiled slightly. Because companies only talk about implications when they realize they might lose control of the situation. And based on that call, Northbridge's leadership had just realized something important. They didn't just have a compensation dispute anymore, they had a merger problem. 2 days later. My phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed a name I actually recognized. Ronan Pike. I stepped outside the office building before answering. The afternoon air was warm, and the parking lot buzzed with employees heading out for lunch. "Molly," he said the moment I picked up. His voice sounded different, tired. "Hey, Ronan," I replied. "What's going on?" There was a long pause before he spoke again. "I think we need to talk, off the record." That got my attention. We agreed to meet later that afternoon at a small cafe a few blocks from the office. When I walked in, Ronan was already sitting at a corner table. He looked like he hadn't slept much. Dark circles under his eyes. He didn't bother with small talk. "Molly, this situation with the bonus and the contract is getting bigger than anyone expected." I took a sip of coffee. How big? Ronan rubbed his forehead. "The merger, so it was real. Northbridge hadn't announced it publicly yet. But the rumors had been right." "Who's the buyer?" I asked. "Apex Dynamics," he said quietly. My eyebrows lifted slightly. Apex wasn't a small company. They were a national software consolidator known for buying mid-size platforms and scaling them across larger enterprise markets. "And the deal I asked?" Ronan exhaled slowly. $59 million. There it was. The number that suddenly explained everything. Wade Kinnan hadn't been cutting bonuses to save $33,000. He'd been trying to eliminate retention obligations before the merger closed, because once the deal was finalized, those payments would become legally unavoidable. "And where do I fit into this?" I asked. Ronan met my eyes. "You're one of the operational leads Apex insisted must stay through the transition." I nodded slowly. "Because of the deployment platform?" He nodded back. "The migration system. The one I built. The one that handled configuration, client credentials, and system transfers for every major account. Without it, the merger integration couldn't happen, and without me, that system didn't run." Ronan leaned closer across the table. "Molly." Wade just realized that, and judging by the tension in the office lately, so had everyone else. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was worried, because I was thinking. Ronan's words kept replaying in my mind. "You're one of the operational leads Apex insisted must stay." That meant something very important. The merger wasn't just about financial numbers. It depended on system continuity. And the system Apex needed to integrate Northbridge into their infrastructure was the client migration platform I had built 6 years earlier. I knew every layer of it. Deployment scripts, client authentication keys, security routing, account configuration templates. 72 enterprise customers were connected to that platform, every single one of them. When Apex acquired Northbridge, those accounts would need to be migrated into Apex environment without disrupting service. If even a few major clients lost access for a day, the entire transition could collapse. And there was one inconvenient detail the executives had forgotten. The system had administrative encryption controls. I had designed them myself. They weren't stored in a shared knowledge base. They were inside a secure configuration vault tied to my operational credentials. Not intentionally hidden, just built that way over the years as the system evolved, which meant something very simple. If I wasn't there to guide the migration process, the platform wouldn't move. And without the platform, the merger integration couldn't proceed. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. Then I wrote a short message to my attorney. 3 sentences. I explained the compensation reduction. I explained the retention clause. And finally, I explained the migration platform. 10 minutes later, he called me. After listening quietly, he said something that made me smile. "Molly, do you realize what just happened?" "I have a feeling," I replied. "You're not negotiating a bonus dispute anymore," he said. "You're negotiating the stability of a $59 million acquisition." I leaned back in my chair, because Wade Kinnan thought this was about $33,000. But the reality was much bigger. Northbridge had just created a problem that could cost them millions. The call from the CEO came the next morning. I had just finished a client check-in when my phone rang. The name on the screen made several people in the office glance up. Daniel Mercer, Chief Executive Officer. I stepped into an empty conference room before answering. "Molly," he said calmly, "thank you for taking the call." His tone was polite. Very polite. which told me two things immediately. First, the situation had reached the executive level. Second, someone had finally explained the real risk. I understand you've been speaking with legal counsel, he continued. That's right, I said. Daniel paused briefly. As you may know, Northbridge is currently in advanced discussions regarding a strategic transaction. He didn't say the word merger. Executives rarely do until the paperwork is signed. I'm aware, I replied. And I believe there's been some confusion regarding your retention agreement. Confusion usually happens when contracts aren't read carefully, I said. He didn't argue. Another short silence followed. Molly, he said finally, let me be direct. We want to resolve this quickly and professionally. Good, I said, because the agreement is actually very simple. I outlined the terms, the retention payment triggered by the compensation reduction, the original performance bonus that had been approved, and my expectation that both would be honored. Daniel listened without interrupting. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. That is a significant amount of money. It's the amount in the contract your company signed. Another pause. Then he said something that made the entire situation very clear. The merger cannot proceed smoothly without your operational support. I let the silence stretch for a moment, because that sentence meant the leverage had finally been acknowledged. So, Daniel continued carefully, let's talk about how we move forward. And for the first time since the review meeting, the company was no longer negotiating from a position of power. Now we were negotiating as equals. The final meeting happened that Saturday morning, not at the office, at a downtown law firm's conference room with glass walls and a long polished table. Across from me sat Daniel Mercer, Wade Kinnan, two board members, and the company's legal counsel. My attorney sat beside me. No one bothered with small talk. Daniel opened the meeting. Molly, we've reviewed the retention agreement and the recent compensation adjustment. That was corporate language, for we finally read the contract. He continued carefully. The company is prepared to resolve this matter immediately. My attorney nodded toward me. Go ahead. Daniel slid a document across the table. It confirmed three things. First, my full Q2 performance bonus would be paid exactly as originally approved. Second, the retention clause payment would be honored under the terms of my agreement. Third, I would remain through the merger transition to oversee the migration platform. The total amount was a little over $250,000. I read the document slowly, then I signed. 3 weeks later, the $59 million acquisition closed. The system migration worked exactly the way it was supposed to. Clients never noticed the transition. The company stabilized, but one person didn't stay long. Wade Kinnan resigned 2 weeks after the merger. Apparently, the board wasn't impressed that his attempt to save $33,000 nearly derailed a $59 million deal. As for me, I stayed through the 90-day transition period. Then I left. These days I work independently, helping companies design operational systems the right way. And every client hears the same advice from me. Document your work, know your contracts, and never let someone take what you've already earned. Because sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one holding the most leverage. I didn't win because I was louder than anyone else in that room. I won because I understood the value of what I had built, and I was willing to stand still long enough to make people see it. I sometimes wonder what you would have done in my position. Would you have signed the paper or asked one more question wherever you're listening from right now? I'd genuinely love to know. Stories like this matter because they remind people they're not powerless. If this one meant something to you, consider subscribing, leaving a comment, or sharing it with someone who might need the reminder. Your support helps these stories reach people who are still trying to find their voice, and that might make you the hero in someone else's story. This story was fully created and produced by our team. We do not copy or borrow content from any other channel. Thank you for staying with us and listening until the end.